Hi, good afternoon. My name is Richard Shepard. I'm with the Memphis Swift Driving Academy here in Memphis, Tennessee, and we are getting ready to conduct a pre-trip inspection for CDL testing and for the state of Tennessee. The first thing that I'm going to inspect will be my amber clearance lights at the top of my tractor. They are all securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. They are clean and functional, and they are amber in color. Next, I will check my amber turn signals, four-ways, and running lights. Securely mounted, not cracked or broken, clean and functional. I will then inspect my headlights. They are securely mounted, they're not cracked or broken, they are clean and functional, and they are clear. Then I'll step back away from my vehicle and look underneath my vehicle to make sure there are no leaks such as antifreeze or excessive oil. Alright, so now we're going to inspect items on the passenger side in the engine compartment. The first item I will inspect will be my coolant reservoir. Make sure it's securely mounted, it's not cracked or broken, it's filled to the proper level, and my caps are tight. There are no leaks. Next, I'll check my alternator. My alternator is belt driven. It is securely mounted. There's no damage. The alternator wires are securely fastened, and there are no exposed wires. I'll then check my alternator belt. This belt is securely mounted. It moves no more than 3/4 of an inch when pushed at center, and there are no cuts or damage to the belts. I will then check my water pump, located right here. This water pump is belt driven. It is securely mounted. There's no damages, and there are no leaks. So I will check both belts to make sure that they are securely mounted, and when pushed on in the center, they move no more than 3/4 of an inch. And there are no cuts or damage to the belts. Next, I will inspect all of my hoses on this side of my engine compartment. I want to make sure that they are all securely mounted. All the fittings are tight and secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and none of them are leaking. Alright, now we're getting ready to inspect the driver's side engine compartment. The first item I'll check is my oil level by using my dipstick. I would pull it out, wipe it clean, reinsert it, take it back out to check to make sure that my oil is filled to the proper level. I will then inspect my gear-driven power steering pump and my gear-driven air compressor. Both of these items are securely mounted. There's no damage to either one, and neither one are leaking. I will then inspect my air lines to my air compressor. I will also inspect my power steering hoses. All of these are securely mounted. All the fittings are secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, cuts, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my power steering fluid reservoir. I want to make sure it's securely mounted, there's no damages, there are no leaks, and that it is filled to the proper level. I am now going to start checking my suspension components. I will check my spring shackles, mounts, and my spring hangers. They all are securely mounted. There's no missing bushings, and they're not cracked or broken or damaged. I will then check my U-bolts. I want to make sure that they are securely mounted. All the nuts and washers are tight. The U-bolts are not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. I will then check my leaf springs. I want to make sure that they are securely mounted. They're not cracked, broken, shifted, or missing. I will now inspect my shock absorber. Make sure it is securely mounted at the top and bottom, no missing bolts, and that there are no damage and there's no leaks. I will then inspect my steering shaft to make sure that it is securely mounted. There is no damage to the shaft. The U-joints at each end are securely mounted and there's no damages to the U-joints. I will then inspect my power steering gearbox. I want to make sure it is securely mounted, it's not cracked or broken or damaged, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my pitman arm, my drag link, my upper steering arm, and my tie rod. I want to make sure all of these items are securely mounted. They're not cracked, broken, damaged, or worn. And I want to ensure that all my castle nuts and cotter pins are tight and in place. I will now be inspecting my brake components on the front of my tractor. First item is my brake air hose. It is securely mounted at both ends. The fittings are secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and there are no leaks. I will then inspect my brake chamber and my brake chamber band. They are both securely mounted. There are no cracks or dents, and there are no leaks. Next, I will inspect my push rod and my slack adjuster. I want to make sure that these items are securely mounted. There are no loose or missing parts. And when the brakes are released and pulled on by hand, the push rod should move no more than 1 inch. I will then inspect my brake drums. My brake drums are securely mounted. There are no cracks or holes. There's no missing bolts. And there are no foreign debris such as oil or grease. I will then inspect my brake linings. I want to make sure that they are securely mounted, they're not damaged, and they're not worn dangerously thin. I'm now going to inspect my wheel and tire assembly. My steer tires are securely mounted. The treads are evenly worn. There are no damages to my sidewalls, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. My tread depth should be no less than 4/32 of an inch, and I would check my tire inflation using the tire pressure gauge. I will now inspect my rim. It is securely mounted, it's not cracked or broken, and there are no welding repairs. I will now inspect my valve stem. I'll make sure it is securely mounted, it's not cracked or damaged, it's not leaking, and the valve cap is on and tight. I will inspect all of my lug nuts. I'll make sure that they are securely mounted, they're tight, none are missing, and there are no running rust trails or shiny threads that would indicate that they are loose. I will then inspect my hub oil seal. I'll make sure it's securely mounted. There's no damage to the hub oil seal, and there are no leaks. If it had a sight glass, I would check for adequate oil level. And next, I will be inspecting all of the items on and down the side of my tractor, from my door to the rear of the tractor. The first item I'll inspect will be my mirror and my mirror brackets. They're all securely mounted. The mirrors are clean. They're not cracked or broken, and there are no illegal stickers. I will then inspect my door latch. I want to make sure that it operates and it works. I will then inspect my door seals to make sure they are intact. I will then inspect my door hinges. I want to make sure that they're not damaged and that my door opens and closes. I will then inspect my amber turn signal, four-way, and marker light. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken. It is clean and functional. I will now inspect my diesel exhaust fluid tank and my diesel fuel tank. Both of these tanks are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. There's no damages, and they're not leaking. all of the lines are securely mounted. There are no abrasions, bulges, cuts, and no leaks from the lines. I would also check for adequate DEF fluid, which is at least 1/8 of a tank, and for adequate diesel fuel. I will now inspect my drive shaft. I want to make sure it is securely mounted. There's no damage to the drive shaft. It's not cracked, broken, bent, or twisted. And there's no debris. And that all of the U-joints are securely mounted and the couplings are tight. I will now inspect my catwalk and my steps. And I will also include my door steps to my tractor. All of these are securely mounted. They're bolted solid, and there are no foreign objects or debris. I'll then check my tractor frame and all of my cross members. I'll make sure they are securely mounted. The frames and cross members are not broken, bent, or twisted. There are no drilled holes or no welding repairs. I will then inspect my torque rod. I want to make sure that it is securely mounted at both ends. There's no missing bushings, and it's not cracked or broken. Now, I will move to my brake components. I will start with my brake hose. These brake hoses are securely mounted. All of the fittings are secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and no leaks. I will now inspect my brake chamber and my brake chamber bands. They are securely mounted. There are no cracks or dents. There's no other damages, and there are no leaks. I will then check my push rod and my slack adjuster. They are securely mounted. There are no loose or missing parts. And with the brakes released and the push rod is pulled by hand, it should move no more than 1 inch. I will now inspect my brake drums. They are securely mounted. There are no cracks or holes. There's no damages, and there is no foreign objects such as oil or grease, and there are no missing bolts. I will now inspect my brake linings. They are securely mounted. There's no damage to the brake linings, and they are not worn dangerously thin. Alright, I will now check suspension components. I will check my spring mounts and my spring hangers. They are securely mounted. All the bolts are tight. They're not cracked or broken or damaged. I will then check my leaf springs. I want to make sure they are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. None are missing and none are shifted. I will then inspect my U-bolts. I want to make sure that they are securely mounted. All the nuts and washers at the bottom are tight. They're not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. I will then check my shock absorber. I'll make sure it is securely mounted at the top and bottom, no missing bolts. There is no damage and there is no leaks to the shock absorber. I will then check my airbag. Make sure that it's properly inflated. There's no damage to the airbag. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. And there are no leaks. And the airbag mounts are securely mounted and not damaged. And now I will check my front splash guard as well as my rear splash guard to make sure that they are securely mounted. There's no damages. They're not torn or missing. I will now inspect my dual tires. I want to make sure that the tread of my tires is evenly worn. There's no damages to my sidewalls, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. I want to make sure that my tread depth is more than a minimum of 2/32, and I would check my tire inflation by using a tire pressure gauge. I will now check the butt spacing between my tires. Make sure they are evenly spaced and there are no foreign objects or debris. I will then inspect my rim. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken or damaged, and there are no welding repairs. I will then inspect my valve stem. It is securely mounted. There's no damage to the valve stem. It's not leaking, and the cap is present and tight. I will then check all of my lug nuts. I'll make sure that they are securely mounted. They're not loose or missing, and there are no running rust trails or shiny threads to indicate looseness. I will then check my axle oil seal to make sure that it is securely mounted. There's no damage to the seal, and it's not leaking. And if it had a sight glass, I would check for adequate level. I will now inspect the rear of my tractor. All of my DOT tape, reflective tape, is clean and intact. It's not damaged. I will then inspect my red brake lights, turn lights, tail lights, and four-ways. These are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. They are clean and functional, and again, they are red in color. As well as my reverse lights. They are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. They're clean, and they are functional, and they are clear. I will now be inspecting our trailer. The first item that I'm going to check will be my amber clearance light at the top. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken, and it is clean and functional. I will then inspect my trailer bulkhead. I'll make sure that there are no cracks or holes or dents, and that it is strong enough to hold the cargo. I will now check my DOT reflective tape all the way down the side of my trailer to make sure it covers at least 50% of the length of my trailer, and it is clean and intact. I will now check my trailer frame, the full length of my trailer, along with all of my cross members and my floor, to make sure that none of these are cracked, broken, missing, or damaged, and there are no holes in the floor. I will now inspect my trailer landing gear. All of the supports are securely mounted. Nothing is cracked or broken. There's no broken welds, no missing bolts. And my landing gear is fully raised. I will now inspect my amber turn signal, four-way, and marker light. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken, and it is clean and functional. I will now be inspecting my suspension components on my trailer. I will start with my spring, shackle, mounts, and my spring hanger. They are all securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken or damaged, and there's no missing bushings. I will then inspect all of my U-bolts. They are securely mounted. All the nuts and washers on the bottom are tight. They're not cracked, broken, loose, or missing. I will then inspect my leaf springs. I'll make sure they are securely mounted. They're not cracked, broken, missing, or shifted. There are no shock absorbers, and there are no airbags. I will now inspect my torsion rod. Make sure it is securely mounted. There's no damages. It's not cracked or broken. There are no missing bushings. I will now inspect my trailer brake components. I will inspect my brake hoses. They are securely mounted at both ends. The fittings are secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my brake chamber and my brake chamber bands. They are securely mounted. There's no cracks or dents, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my brake drums. They are securely mounted. There are no cracks or holes. There are no missing bolts. There's no debris, such as oil or grease, on the brake drums. I will then inspect my brake linings. They are securely mounted, there's no damages, and they are not worn dangerously thin. I will now check my push rod and my slack adjusters for my brakes. They are securely mounted. There are no loose or missing parts, and there are no damages. With the brakes released and the push rod pulled by hand, it should move no more than 1 inch. I will now inspect my tandem slide locking pins and my tandem release handle. I will make sure both are in the locked position and neither one are cracked or broken, missing, or damaged. I will now check my dual tires on my trailers. I will start with my bud spacing, make sure it is evenly spaced and there are no foreign objects or debris. I will then check both tires. I'll make sure that my tread is evenly worn and there are no damages to my sidewalls. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. My tires are not leaking and my tread depth should be more than a minimum of 230 seconds. And I will check my tire pressure with a tire pressure gauge. I will then check my rim. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken or damaged, and there are no welding repairs. I will then check my valve stem. It is securely mounted. It's not cracked or damaged. It's not leaking, and the cap is present and tight. I will then check all of my lug nuts to make sure that they are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken or damaged, and there are no rust trails or shiny threads to indicate that they are loose. I will now check my hub oil seal to make sure that it is securely mounted. There's no damage to the hub oil seal. It's not leaking, and if it had a sight glass, I would check for adequate level. I will now check my trailer splash guards or mud flaps to make sure they are securely mounted. They're not torn, damaged, or missing. I will inspect my door tie to make sure it's securely mounted, it's not damaged. I will now inspect my amber ABS light and my red marker light. Both are securely mounted, they're not cracked or broken, and they are clean and functional. Now I'll be inspecting the rear of my trailer. I will start with the overall condition of my door. There's no damage to my door. There's no cracks or holes. All of my hinges are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken. I will then check my door latch to make sure that it is latched. I would check my door to make sure that it does open and close properly. I will now check my DOT reflective tape across the back of my trailer. It should cover a minimum of 50% and it is clean and intact. I will now inspect my red clearance lights at the top, my red brake lights, tail lights, turn signals in 4 ways. I want to make sure they are securely mounted. They're not cracked or broken, and they are clean and functional. As well as my amber flashers and my white tag light. Again, securely mounted, not cracked or broken, clean and functional. I will now inspect my landing gear crank handle. I want to make sure that there's no damage to it and it is securely locked in place. Still on the passenger side of my vehicle, I will be checking my exhaust system. I will make sure that everything is securely mounted, all the clamps are tight, there are no cracks, holes, or severe dents, and there are no signs of carbon soot or rust to indicate a leak. I will now begin to inspect all of my coupling items for my truck and trailer. I will start with my air connectors for my tractor and my air connectors for my trailer. They are sealed and in good condition. They're not leaking. I will then check my tractor air lines and my trailer air lines. Again, they are securely mounted. All the fittings are secure. There are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my tractor electrical connector and my trailer electrical connector. Both are firmly seated and locked in place, and there's no damages. I will then inspect my tractor electrical line and my trailer electrical lines. Both of these are securely mounted. There's no damage to the lines, and there are no exposed or bare wires. I will then check my glad hands. Both are securely mounted. There's no damages. Nothing is cracked or broken. The seal inside is intact, and there are no leaks. I will now inspect my trailer apron. This item is securely mounted. There's no damages, there are no cracks or holes. I will inspect my fifth wheel skid plate. It is securely mounted to the platform. All the pins are intact and not missing, and it is properly greased. I will then inspect my platform. There are no cracks or breaks in the platform structure. I will then check my fifth wheel release handle. I want to make sure that it's not damaged and it is in the locked position. I will then check all of my fifth wheel mounting bolts. All of these bolts are securely mounted. There are none that are loose or missing, and there's no damages. I will then check and inspect my fifth wheel slider rail. This slider rail is securely mounted. It's not cracked or broken or damaged. I will inspect my fifth wheel locking pins. I want to make sure they are not damaged and they are fully in the locked position. I will now look into my fifth wheel gap to check my kingpin. To make sure that it is securely mounted and it's not cracked, bent, or broken. I will also inspect my fifth wheel locking jaw to make sure it is locked completely around my kingpin. I will now check that my fifth wheel is in the proper position to give me clearance between the rear of my tractor and my landing gear to safely make turns so that the back of my tractor does not hit my landing gear. Alright, I will now look up underneath my trailer, and I want to check between my apron and my fifth wheel that there is no gap between them. Alright, I will now inspect all of my gauges. I will check my oil pressure gauge to make sure that it is working and that it rises to the operating oil pressure and that the warning light goes off. I will then check my water temperature gauge. I want to make sure that it is working and that it is rising or climbing to the normal operating temperature. I will then inspect both of my air gauges, 1 and 2, to make sure that they are working. To ensure that they're working, I will now build the air pressure to my governor cutoff of roughly 120 to 140 psi. and both my air pressure gauges are working. I will now check my fuel gauge for my diesel fuel and my diesel exhaust fluid gauge to make sure that they are both working and that it shows that I have an adequate level of each, at least 1/8 of a tank. I will now check my voltmeter. I want to make sure that it is working, indicating that my alternator is charging my batteries. I will now inspect my dash indicator lights. I will check my left turn signal indicator. It's working. My right turn signal indicator. It's working. My four-way indicators, they are working. And my high beam indicator, they're all working. I will now inspect my windshield wipers. I want to make sure that they are working and that there are no damage to my wiper arms or my wiper blades. I want to make sure that my windshield washer fluid is working, and it is. I will now check to make sure that both of my horns are working. My city horn and my air horn, they work. I will now check my heater and my defrost. I will select a hot setting, place this on the defrost and the floor setting, turn up my fan. I will check my defroster at the top to make sure it is working. It's working. And I will check the heat below, down by my feet. It is working. I am now ready to start my test for my tractor and trailer parking brakes. To do this, I will release my tractor parking brake in order to test my trailer parking brakes. I will then place my vehicle in the drive and give a gentle pull. My trailer parking brakes are working. I will now test my tractor parking brakes by setting them or applying them, releasing my trailer brakes, putting my vehicle back into drive, and pulling gently. My tractor parking brakes are working. I will now secure my vehicle. Next, I am ready to perform a service brake test. I will release both my tractor and trailer parking brakes by pushing them in, place my vehicle in the drive, and pull forward at 5 miles an hour. I will then apply my foot brake, bringing my vehicle to a stop to make sure that it stops smoothly and that when I push the pedal, the vehicle does not pull to the left or the right. Alright, I'm now going to get up to 5 miles per hour. I will now apply my brake. My vehicle does stop smoothly, and it did not pull to the left or to the right. I will now secure my vehicle. At this time, I will now rebuild my air pressure to the governor cutoff of roughly 120 to 140 psi in order to begin my 3-part air brake test. My air pressure has now reached the governor cutoff of 120 to 140 psi. I will now shut my vehicle off. I will now exit the vehicle to place my chock between my tires. I will place my key back into the ignition. I will now refasten my seatbelt. And I'm now going to turn my key to the on position to give power to my gauges. For this first test, I will push in both my tractor and trailer parking brakes to release them. Once the air pressure stabilizes, I will fully depress my brake pedal and hold it for 1 minute. During the 1 minute, I should lose no more than 4 pounds of air for a combination vehicle. Now that my air pressure has stabilized, I would ask the examiner if they would time me for 1 minute for this test. Start now. Alright, my 1 minute is up. During that 1 minute, I did not lose more than 4 pounds of air for this combination vehicle. Next, I will perform the test to get my low air pressure warning devices, which should be my low air pressure warning light and my low air pressure warning alarm, to activate. I'll do that by fanning off the air pressure. These devices should activate before my air pressure drops below 55 psi. My low air warning light has activated. Here, here, and here. And what you hear is my low air warning alarm. I will now continue to fan off my air pressure. This is to get my tractor and my trailer parking brake valves to pop out or close. These should pop out between 20 to 45 psi. Both my tractor and trailer valves have popped out, and they popped out between 20 to 45 psi. So at this time, I would take a minute to double check everything in my vehicle to ensure that I have covered all of the items I need to cover for my pre-trip inspection. That would also include the outside. If I felt that I missed something, I would go back out and check the item that I feel that I missed. But I feel that I have covered everything. So this would conclude my pre-trip inspection.